Hi everybody, Brenna Cantner here with Nexus Youth and Family Services. I am the Therapeutic Services Coordinator here at Nexus, and this is our October Wellness Workshop. We are going to be talking unemployment and mental health and the impacts. They're real. It's very real, and even more so with COVID-19, which in and of itself has impacts to our mental health. So we're going to talk a lot about that. People that were maybe looking for work before COVID-19 and still haven't been able to find it, or people that have experienced COVID-19 layoffs. It impacts us. It impacts mental health, and so it's an important conversation for us to have. So I'm excited to share some new information with you. Okay, so before we dive in, I feel like I need to say this, right? As a therapist, I work primarily with children, which means I also work with their caregivers. And I think it's just so important for you to hear that you are not alone and it's okay to ask for help. The pandemic has kind of created a mental health pandemic, and everybody's struggling, and it might look different and it might feel a little bit different, and it might be like varying levels of struggle. But at the end of the day, like, your feelings are valid because you feel them. And so I think it's important just to know that you are not alone. So unemployment can damage emotional health. Psychologists draw a direct connection from involuntary joblessness to mental health in so many different ways, from social development, social connection, feeling helpless. That helplessness often comes from that perceived lack of control. So there's a lot of ways that unemployment can affect our mental health. Why, right? I think in so many circumstances, the why is important. So in this case, why does unemployment impact our mental health? So there's a lot of research that shows that working can be an important part, like integral part of somebody's well-being. Some benefits of work include, this is expected, right? Income and financial stability, which impacts quality of life, right? Having that income that's expected and you know when it's coming, it's important. Daily routines and sense of structure. It matters for our children, it matters for us. A sense of structure and purpose. So a sense of purpose is one of the reasons also. It's a little further down. Social activity, social supports. Feeling connected to other people, feeling connected to other humans, your friends at work, right? You get close to people you work with pretty often, and maybe not like best friends, but you have connections with people, and unemployment means you lose that support. Personal achievement, right? You get a sense of doing good, right? You get a sense of fulfillment and achievement when you complete a task or you get kudos at work. Sense of purpose and a sense of status and identity, right? A lot of people's identity lies in their jobs. So when somebody tells you about themselves, typically one of the first things they say is, this is what I do for a living, this is my family, right? A lot of people see their identity in their work, their family, and like their hobbies, right? Like that's how we identify, and that's how we make connections with people. Okay, so the reason I'm including the stages of development, Erik Erikson, who he created this theory about stages of psychosocial development. And when we talk about the impact to work, there's reasons behind, right, the science of our brain. And so healthy personality and emotional development during adulthood requires that a person believe that they're making strides to better themselves, to contribute to their families, to contribute to their community. And so self-esteem can be compromised during unemployment, which leads to anxiety, self-doubt, and depression. So I think there are two areas that are really important here that we look at. I'm going to talk a little bit later about children and youth, but essentially right now with COVID-19 and kids not having school in the same way, it's like they're unemployed as well, right? So if you think about Your children during this time also, especially teenagers, right? They've lost their sense of purpose, like all of those things that I just talked about, of they've lost their structure, all of those things. Essentially, your child is kind of unemployed right now too, even though they're doing distance learning. It's not the same. So when you look here at this kind of steps, it increases in complexity over time. So if you look at like the green and up, so it starts whereas like you're a teenager, young adult, where you are figuring out who you are in the world and your place in the world. That's where you start. That's what starts as a teenager, and it's really important for that social development, right? We start like intimacy versus isolation. That's where we start forming relationships with other people versus being isolated. Generativity versus stagnation. Are you contributing to the world in a way that feels meaningful for you? That's generativity. Versus stagnation, feeling stuck and like you're not contributing, which is where the unemployment comes in. So those two kind of green colors and yellow color are those really important stages actually that we're going to be, that we're talking about today when you think of the concept of unemployment. So when we have a stressful event happen in our life, our body reacts and it moves through like a progression of stages, kind of similar to grief. Our bodies are really, really good indicators for our feelings and what's going on and how it's impacting us physically and emotionally. So if you can start kind of cueing into your bodies of if you're angry, are you clenching your jaw? Are you clenching your fists? Are you feeling hot? If you're nervous, are you feeling a weight in your chest? Or your stomach kind of feeling off? A lot of times we can respond to our feelings with positive coping skills if we can start recognizing those body cues ahead of time. So we'll talk more about coping skills. But our body responds to stress in a similar way that it would to like grief. So if you think of unemployment, the idea of grief is about loss, right? And so it might seem flippant to talk about, when people think of grief, they typically think of like the loss of a loved one. But loss is loss. And we grieve losses. It just is what it is. It's real. And so when you're grieving, there's 5 stages and they are not linear. It's, if you think of the 5 stages, it's more swirly, right? Just because you get through something, you could get triggered and go backwards or, kind of go back to a different one or move forward faster than someone else might. So you think of denial, where you're like, wait, what? And not necessarily in the sense of like, it didn't happen, I'm still going to go to work. If we're thinking about like unemployment, not denial in the sense of you keep showing up to your job, but denial of like, how is this happening? Like, how did this happen? Anger, right? So feeling angry, feeling slighted, feeling like it's unfair. We think of the, like bargaining. Sorry, I was thinking. Think of bargaining. So like, if I had done this, then this would have happened. Or if this had happened, then this would be different. Or if this had happened, I wouldn't have lost my job, or whatever it is, right? We start going through those stages of bargaining and rationalizing. Then typically depression sets in, and then you can move to acceptance. So those things can they're fluid. It's not one thing after another necessarily, but the concept of grief and loss in those stages is important. So, right, like shock tends to characterize the initial phase. You're still kind of optimistic, like, how did this happen? I can fix this. Moving into kind of active distress, where that's where that anger, bargaining, depression, increased levels of anxiety, frustration, disappointment, alienation. And people, right, it's kind of like the people that are higher up have farther to fall. So individuals with like greater financial responsibilities or prior success are more vulnerable to suffer emotional consequences more intensely and more quickly. So if like a CEO of some Fortune 500 company like suddenly lost their job, the consequences of that might be greater than like a 17-year-old like losing a job from a coffee shop. Not saying that both of those things wouldn't be hard, but there's just levels, right? Everybody struggles and everyone has a hard time, but I hope that makes sense. So yeah, like just kind of thinking about this concept around like the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And reaching that acceptance stage and being in that place is beneficial for you in moving forward and taking steps forward. So some individual costs of unemployment: there's big impact. Studies confirm it, that unemployed people, they still even with income assistance, still experience a loss of well-being, especially when you didn't plan it. Higher stress, lower self-esteem, fear about the future, social isolation, stigma. It's really hard to tell someone that you were fired from a job. And increased problematic substance use. That's huge. Increased risk of mental illness. And if you already were experiencing mental illness, worsening symptoms. There are also community costs of unemployment. So unemployment impacts communities economically is one of the ways, right? So if there are more people in the community that are unemployed, they're not frequenting businesses to keep other businesses going. COVID-19 was really impactful because the shutdown of many of our local businesses made, right, more people unemployed. And then the businesses that were staying open weren't getting frequented because the rate of unemployment was so high. So the cost to our economy with unemployment can be pretty devastating as well. And especially in a small town like ours, we feel it, right? When there is increased unemployment, there is lower life satisfaction across an entire community. As unemployment rate rise, people in a community can feel less satisfied with their own quality of life, even if they have jobs, just because of the impact to those around them, right? I have been fortunate enough to have a job through the pandemic, but I also have friends that weren't as lucky or lost hours. Like I said, the pandemic has kind of created a mental health pandemic, and being a therapist, I have work, but that's not the case for everybody because people are struggling. I go back to you are not alone, and it's okay to ask for help. Like, ask for help. There's rising health problems with unemployment. A Canadian study found that a 10% rise in unemployment would increase the number of people dying from heart disease. It would increase suicide rates, and it would increase the amount of people admitted to psychiatric hospitals, right? It makes sense, but it's not something we necessarily think about. This is so, so important. So if you are unemployed or have ever been unemployed, think about your children right now too. So a kid's job is to go to school. So how are they impacted? Same ways that an adult would be, right? With kids having their sports taken away, school being different and distance learning. I know like A and B students that are now like failing their classes because they're struggling to engage online. So children are impacted in a lot of similar ways. And so if you think of this situation as like they're kind of unemployed as well, there's a loss of purpose, loss of hope, feeling isolated and lonely, limiting social development. And as a kid, that's so important. It's where you're figuring out your place in the world, figuring out like how you're different from other people and how you can contribute to the world. Increased symptoms of anxiety, depression, decreased motivation, difficulty focusing and staying on task. All of these things are impacts to adults when they're unemployed. And so you think about a child in this situation as well, just to kind of put it in a different frame for you. So when life is, normal outside of the pandemic, or when you have a job versus when you don't have a job, right? We think of kind of what's normal, right? And what that can look like for us. And so learning to cope with unemployment. So these strategies can be used to support your children going through kind of their own unemployment. I know for me as a kid, sports were everything to me, right? I played sports year round. I worked when I was in high school. I did student government, right? All of those things. And that was where my identity was school and sports. And I can't imagine, right, not having that. I know teenagers are just struggling hard right now. So some ways to cope with this: establish a daily schedule, including regular time for job search activities. So I just stress the importance of getting back to basics. So even if you don't have a job or you don't have a schedule, right? I hear a lot of that kids are just sleeping all day. Not good. Not good for depression, not good for anxiety, not good for motivation. Same for you as an adult. When you want to crawl into bed, it's the most important time not to do that and to implement a healthy coping skill. So establishing a daily schedule and a routine, even in the midst of chaos, it can just make you feel better. If you're getting up at the same time and having breakfast, having lunch, having dinner, going to bed at a regular time, not staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, not sleeping during the day, a schedule, setting daily goals that you can accomplish, even if that is something like going for a walk. It's really important for our brains to get exercise and fresh air. Go to the library, call a friend, write out a plan for the next day, schedule your week. But exercise, yoga, spend time in nature, all of those things, set daily goals that you can accomplish and you can get done. Keeping busy, staying active outside of your home. I know with social isolation, it can be challenging, and with the fires, it got smoky, and so it was really challenging there for a minute, but getting active, staying isolated, even if you just feel like being alone. Again, when you feel really drawn to that negative thing of isolating yourself and not talking to your friends, or not finding joy in the things that you used to, wanting to sleep, right? Those are all increased symptoms of depression, and it's important to push yourself into doing the opposite of those things. So if you want to sit on the couch and binge watch Netflix, get up and go for a walk outside, even 30 minutes, stand up, do jumping jacks, put on a YouTube exercise thing, something, and then that changes the chemicals in your brain as well. Give yourself credit where credit's due. Have self-compassion. Reward yourself for your efforts. Even it can be small, but reward yourself. And it couldn't just be a kudos, recognizing that you made a huge effort. Pursue a hobby that you've always wanted to try. Check into new career opportunities or the possibility of continuing your education. Think outside the box. It might mean, if you're wanting to branch out and try a different field, it might mean that you can volunteer, which means you can get some work experience in that field. Look into courses or online trainings to kind of keep your skills up to date. There's lots of ways to cope in a healthy way, and kind of work through the anger and the depression and those things that can kind of creep in. Okay, so with COVID-19, we have increased screen time. I'm sitting here on a screen right now. As adults, you might be doing meetings, your kids are on screens, right? You're on your phone looking for a job, right? Whatever it is, there's such an increase in screen time, especially for youth. So with distance learning, it's even more important to limit screen time in non-school hours. And so this is important for adults too. So you're going to lead by example. Limit your own screen time. I'm guilty of sitting on the couch watching it, having a show on, and being on my phone at the same time. Plan screen-free time, outdoors, games, music. Agree on daily screen limits. It's about balance, right? Tech-free zones, for example, like all screens off in bedrooms after 9 p.m. And then resist giving mobile devices as distractors, like use books or toys. For children, it's important to just kind of keep in mind, like brains are still developing until people are in their 20s. So children have a harder time self-regulating because they become like, it makes them, the younger that they're involved in increased screen time, it makes them more susceptible to becoming addicted to screens. Kids kind of crave that low effort, high reward activities, and they can easily become addicted to TVs, screens, iPads, tablets, video games. Children who reported more than 2 hours a day of screen time got lower scores on thinking and language tests. It can increase obesity. It can disrupt sleep. Screen addictions have been found to increase issues with mood, depression, anxiety, insomnia. There's all kinds of ways that screens impact your brain as children and as adults. And so it's just something to keep in mind that when you're unemployed, right, for kids unemployed because of school, as an adult and as adults, the likelihood of increased screen time is there. So it's just something to keep in mind. And we're actually going to have a whole wellness workshop on screen time and social media in November. So get excited. All right, so here is a resource page. There's a free self-care guide. If you're struggling with income, you can go to the Get Help page for Interfaith Food Bank and Amador County, and the application's on there and the income requirements are on there. Blue Ribbon Personnel, it can help you find jobs. Motherlode Job Training, State of California, there's low-cost automobile insurance program. Just some various resources here. Secondly, our YouTube page is filled with resources on resources in the community, on mental health and wellness, on some ideas for like non-screen time kind of things for your kiddos. Check out the other resources on our page. We have, I did DIY calm down jars last month. We've done salt painting, and all of our DIY activities are things that really should, like things that are easily accessible and that you have around your house. Lots of resources. I did parenting education on the last 2 months, all kinds of options. So just keep in mind, scroll through our YouTube page and pay attention to the things that might work for you and your family and give them a watch, okay? Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please let me know. Also, if you can do a survey, that would be great. The link will be in the description below, okay? So you take care. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you next time.